The dust settled on the horizon as Elizabeth Caldwell stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror, her eyes hollow with grief. 3 doctors had delivered the same verdict: her womb was barren, a desert that would never bloom with life, and now, at 22, she faced a future devoid of the children she had always dreamed of holding in her arms. Elizabeth tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and adjusted her simple cotton dress. 4 years had passed since the fever that nearly claimed her life had instead stolen her future. The whispers followed her through the streets of Riverton, Colorado, a small mining town where secrets were as scarce as rainfall in August. "Poor thing," they would say, just loud enough for her to hear. "No man will have her now." The year was 1874, and a woman without the promise of children was considered as useful as a rifle without bullets. Elizabeth had resigned herself to spinsterhood, finding purpose in helping her father run the general store after her mother's passing 2 years prior. "Lizzie," her father called from downstairs, "the shipment from Denver is here. Could use your help cataloging." "Coming, Pa," she replied, taking one last glance at herself before heading down the narrow staircase. The store was already bustling with morning customers, women purchasing flour and sugar, miners grabbing tobacco and whiskey, and children eyeing the glass jars of candy with longing. Elizabeth slipped behind the counter, her practiced smile revealing nothing of the emptiness she carried within. As she counted inventory in the back room, the bell above the door jingled. Her father's voice, warmer than usual, carried through the thin walls. "Well, I'll be damned. Ethan Ingram! Haven't seen you in these parts for years." Elizabeth's hands stilled on the ledger. Ethan Ingram had been a legend in Riverton before he left to try his luck in the cattle business. 10 years her senior, he had been barely more than a name to her when she was a child, but everyone knew of his skill with horses and his quick draw. Both had saved his life more than once. Curiosity pulled her to the doorway. The man standing at the counter was tall, his broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. A dusty hat sat atop dark hair streaked with sun, and when he turned, she saw eyes the color of the sky just before dawn, a clear, piercing blue that seemed to cut through the dim light of the store. "Mr. Caldwell," Ethan said, his voice deep and rough, like stones rolling in a river. "Good to see you still keeping this town supplied. What brings you back? Last I heard you had a spread down near the Texas border." "I did." Ethan nodded, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. "Lost it in the drought of '72. Been working my way back north since then, driving cattle for the Harrington outfit. Just delivered a herd to the railhead at Cheyenne. And now? Looking to settle somewhere familiar. Heard old man Murphy's place just outside town might be for sale." Elizabeth's father nodded. "It is. His son wants to sell since the old man passed last winter. Good land, good water. Needs work, though." "Work I can handle," Ethan said, his gaze drifting past her father to where Elizabeth stood watching. She should have stepped back, returned to her inventory, but something in those blue eyes held her in place. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else: interest, perhaps, or simple curiosity. "This can't be little Lizzie," he said, removing his hat. "Last time I saw you, you were chasing fireflies in pigtails." Heat crept up Elizabeth's neck. "Mr. Ingram," she said with a slight nod. "Welcome back to Riverton." Her father chuckled. "Not so little anymore. Lizzie runs this place as much as I do these days." Ethan's eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than propriety dictated. "I can see that." The intensity of his gaze made Elizabeth acutely aware of her plain dress and the wisps of hair escaping her simple bun. She was not beautiful, not like Clara Johnson with her golden curls or Rebecca Smith with her perfect figure, but something in the way Ethan looked at her made her feel seen for the first time in years. "We just got some new tools in," she said, finding her voice. "If you're looking to fix up Murphy's place." "I'll take a look," he said, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. After I've made an offer. Don't want to jinx it. Superstitious? She asked before she could stop herself. His smile widened, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Cautious. The West has a way of taking back what it gives if you're not careful. There was a story there, in the lines around his eyes and the set of his jaw, and Elizabeth found herself wanting to know it. Well, her father said, breaking the moment, you'll need supplies regardless. Come by any time. I will, Ethan said, placing his hat back on his head with a nod to them both. Good day, Mr. Caldwell. Miss Elizabeth? After he left, Elizabeth's father gave her a curious look. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he replied, turning back to his ledger. Just haven't seen you look at anyone like that in a long time. Elizabeth said nothing, returning to her inventory with deliberate focus, but her mind kept circling back to those blue eyes and the way they had looked at her, not with pity, not with the knowledge of her barrenness, but with genuine interest. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something dangerous ignite in her chest. Hope. And hope, for a woman like her, was the most dangerous thing of all. The next day brought Ethan back to the store, this time with purpose in his stride. Elizabeth was alone, her father having gone to the bank, when the bell announced his arrival. Miss Caldwell, he greeted, hat already in his hands. Mr. Ingram, she replied, setting aside the bolt of fabric she had been measuring. How can I help you? I made an offer on Murphy's place, he said. Old Sam Murphy Jr. accepted right away. Seems he's eager to head back east. Congratulations, Elizabeth said. It's good land. I know. Worked it with his father one summer when I was younger than you. He ran a hand through his hair, and she noticed a scar on his wrist, white against tanned skin. Now I need those tools you mentioned, and some other supplies. Of course. As she gathered the items, he requested hammers, nails, saws, seed for planting. They fell into easy conversation. He asked about changes in the town since he'd been gone, and she found herself telling him about the new schoolhouse and the railroad that was rumored to be coming through next year. And you? He asked as she wrote up his order. You've been here all along? Elizabeth nodded. Never left, though I had plans once to go to Denver for schooling. What changed? She hesitated. My mother became ill. After she passed, Pa needed help with the store. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Her illness had come after her mother's death, and by the time she recovered, her dreams of teaching had been replaced by the stark reality of her condition. Ethan seemed to sense there was more, but didn't press. It's a good store. Your father's lucky to have you. Thank you. She finished writing and handed him the bill. When will you move to the Murphy place? Tomorrow. It's not much. Now the house needs a new roof, and the barn's barely standing, but it will be. A proper ranch again. You'll be needing a lot more than tools then, Elizabeth said, thinking practically. Furniture, household goods, food supplies. I've been sleeping under the stars with a saddle for a pillow for so long, I might have forgotten what a proper home needs, he admitted with a wry smile. The words escaped before she could consider them. I could help. With a list, I mean, of things you might need. Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by gratitude. I'd appreciate that, Miss Caldwell. Elizabeth? She said softly. Please. Elizabeth, he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice. And I'm Ethan. When her father returned, he found them bent over a sheet of paper, her neat handwriting filling it with essentials for a bachelor setting up house. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Ethan paid for his purchases and promised to return for the rest once he was settled. Be careful, Lizzie, her father said after Ethan had gone, loading his supplies onto a borrowed wagon. What do you mean? Ethan Ingram has a reputation. Good with horses, good with his gun, Not so good with staying in one place. And you. He trailed off, his expression softening with paternal concern. And I'm damaged goods, she finished for him, the familiar bitterness rising in her throat. Is that what you were going to say? No, he said firmly. Never that. But you've been hurt enough by life. I don't want to see you hurt by a man, too. Elizabeth turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. It was just a list, Pa. Nothing more. But as she watched through the window as Ethan drove away, she wondered if she was lying to her father or to herself. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a regular at the store. He came for supplies, but lingered to talk. About the progress on the ranch, he'd fixed the roof and shored up the barn, about his plans for cattle, about the weather and the town gossip. He never mentioned a wife, and Elizabeth never asked. It wasn't her place, though she'd heard the whispers start again, this time about her. How she was setting her cap for the handsome newcomer, how she was doomed to disappointment when he learned the truth. One afternoon in late October, as golden light slanted through the windows, Ethan came in while she was alone again. "Elizabeth," he said, and there was something different in his voice that made her look up sharply from the accounts she was balancing. "Ethan, what is it?" He placed his hat on the counter, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign he planned to stay a while. "I was wondering if you might like to join me for dinner on Sunday, after church." Her heart stuttered. "Dinner?" "Yes." He cleared his throat. "At the hotel restaurant. I hear Mrs. Peterson makes a fine roast on Sundays. A proper invitation. In public, where everyone would see, where everyone would talk." "Why?" The question slipped out, unplanned and unvarnished. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Because I enjoy your company. Because I'd like to know you better outside of this store." "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm asking to have dinner with a beautiful, intelligent woman who makes me smile," he said simply. "What more should I know?" Everything, she thought. The whispers, the pitying glances, the future I can't give you. "People will talk," she said instead. He laughed, a warm sound that filled the quiet store. "People always talk. Let them." Elizabeth looked at him, really looked, at the strength in his hands, the confidence in his stance, the warmth in his eyes. At 32, Ethan Ingram was a man who knew his own mind, and for reasons she couldn't fathom, he had set it on her. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I would like that." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Good. I'll call for you at noon on Sunday." After he left, Elizabeth pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the heat there. What had she done? Given him hope, given herself hope, where there could be none? She should call it off. Send a note. Make an excuse. But when Sunday came, she found herself in her best dress, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes, waiting for the knock at the door that would change everything. Dinner at the hotel was a revelation. Ethan was attentive, pulling out her chair, making sure her water glass was always full, asking questions and listening, truly listening to her answers. They talked about books they had read, about his travels across the West, about her childhood in Riverton. "You're different than I expected," he said, as they shared an apple pie for dessert. "How so?" "Most women I meet want to talk about themselves. Or about me. You ask about ideas. About the world." Elizabeth smiled, pleased by the observation. "My mother taught me to read before I could walk, according to my father. Books have always been my window to places I'll never see." "Never is a long time," Ethan said, his eyes serious. "The world's out there waiting, Elizabeth. For both of us." The implications of his words hung between them, heavy with possibility. She looked down at her plate, gathering courage. "There's something you should know about me," she began, her voice low. Something everyone in town knows, which is why they're all watching us right now. It was true. Throughout dinner, she had felt the stares, heard the whispers. Ethan had seemed oblivious, or perhaps just unconcerned. "I don't care what they know or think they know," he said firmly. "You should." She met his gaze directly. "4 years ago, I became very ill with a fever. I nearly died. When I recovered, the doctor told me that the fever had—" She swallowed hard. "That I would never be able to bear children." There, it was said. The shameful truth laid bare between them like a wall. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Elizabeth braced herself for the polite excuses, the sudden remembrance of an appointment elsewhere. The end of whatever this might have been. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said softly. "It can't have been easy to carry such a burden." "You don't understand," she said, fighting back tears. "A man like you, a rancher, needs sons, heirs." "A man like me," he repeated, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, "needs a partner. Someone to share the work and the rewards, the joys and the sorrows." His eyes held hers steadily. "I've been alone a long time, Elizabeth. I've learned what matters." Hope fluttered in her chest again, stronger this time. "But your legacy can be built in many ways," he finished for her. "Now, I believe I promised to walk you home before dark." As they left the hotel, Elizabeth was acutely aware of the gazes following them, the conversations that halted as they passed, only to resume in urgent whispers once they were out the door. She held her head high, drawing strength from Ethan's solid presence beside her. The evening air was crisp with the promise of winter, and Ethan offered his arm as they walked the short distance to her home above the store. They moved in comfortable silence, the enormity of what had passed between them settling around them like a cloak. At her door, he turned to face her, still holding her hand. "I meant what I said, Elizabeth. Your worth isn't measured by what your body can or cannot do." "The whole town thinks differently," she said softly. "Then the whole town is wrong." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "May I call on you again?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good night, then," he said, releasing her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the connection. "Sleep well." Elizabeth watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the last light of day. Only when he turned the corner did she go inside, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Ethan did call again, and again after that. Through the winter months, as snow blanketed Riverton and made travel difficult, he still found his way to town at least once a week. Sometimes they would have dinner at the hotel. Other times he would simply sit with her and her father by the fire in their small living quarters, talking about his progress on the ranch or listening to her read aloud from whatever book she was currently enjoying. The townspeople continued to whisper, but now there was a different quality to their gossip. Speculation about Ethan's intentions, wonderment at his continued interest in the barren shopkeeper's daughter, curiosity about what would happen when spring came. Elizabeth tried not to listen, tried not to let their words poison the joy she found in Ethan's company. But doubts crept in during the long nights, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he truly understood what he was giving up by choosing her. On a clear day in early March, when the first hints of green were appearing on the hillsides, Ethan arrived at the store with a proposition. "Come see the ranch," he said without preamble. "Your father too, if he wishes. I've been working all winter and I want to show you what I've accomplished." Her father, who had grown genuinely fond of Ethan, shook his head. "My old bones don't take well to riding anymore, but Lizzie should go. Get some fresh air." And so, with her father's blessing and a packed lunch, Elizabeth found herself seated beside Ethan on the wagon bench, heading out of town toward what had once been the Murphy place, but was now, in her mind at least, Ethan's ranch. As they crested the hill that overlooked the property, Elizabeth gasped. The transformation was remarkable. The house, once dilapidated, now stood proud with a new roof and fresh paint. The barn had been completely rebuilt, and beside it stood a new corral where several horses grazed. Fields that had lain fallow for years had been plowed, ready for spring planting. "Ethan," she breathed, "it's wonderful." Pride shone in his eyes as he guided the wagon down the slope. "I wanted it to be right before I showed you. There's still work to be done, but it's coming along." He gave her a tour of everything the house with its simple but solid furniture, much of it made by his own hands. The barn with stalls for horses and a small dairy cow he'd acquired, the chicken coop he'd built just last week. "You've done all this yourself?" she asked as they sat on the porch steps, sharing the lunch she'd packed. "Mostly. Hired help for the big things raising the barn mainly. A man can do a lot when he has purpose." He looked at her, his expression serious. "And I have purpose now, Elizabeth." She felt the weight of his words, the implication behind them. "It's a beautiful home, Ethan. It could be your home, too." The bread she was holding fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. "What?" Ethan set aside his plate and took her hands in his. "I'm asking you to marry me, Elizabeth Caldwell, to be my wife, my partner in this life I'm building." But she couldn't finish the thought, overwhelmed by the reality of what he was offering. "I know what you're thinking," he said gently, "and I've thought about it too. I won't lie and say I never wanted children. I did. But life doesn't always give us what we expect. It gives us what we need." He squeezed her hands. "And I need you." Tears filled her eyes. "You say that now, but what about years from now, when you see other men with their sons working beside them? Their daughters getting married? Will you resent me then?" "No." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "Elizabeth, before I came back to Riverton, I was drifting. No home, no purpose beyond the next paycheck. Then I saw you again, standing in that doorway with sunlight in your hair, and something inside me recognized you. Not the little girl I barely remembered, but the woman you've become. Strong, resilient, kind despite the world's cruelty." He released one of her hands to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. Children or no children." "I love you too," she whispered, the words she'd held back for months finally breaking free. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of believing in this. In us. In a future that seems too good to be true." Ethan smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. "Then we'll take it one day at a time, starting with today." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I got this in Denver last month. Had it sized by guessing so it might need adjusting." Inside the box lay a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. Nothing ostentatious but perfect in its simplicity. "Will you marry me, Elizabeth? Make this house a home with me?" She looked from the ring to his face, so open and honest, so full of love for her despite everything. In that moment, she made her choice to believe, to hope, to love without reservation. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Ingram." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Perhaps, she thought as he pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise, it had been. They were married in April, when wildflowers dotted the hills around Riverton. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, some genuinely happy for them, others simply curious to see the culmination of the unlikely romance that had been the subject of so much speculation. Elizabeth wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slighter frame. Ethan wore a new suit, his hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven for the occasion. They spoke their vows in the small church where Elizabeth had attended services her entire life, her father giving her away with tears in his eyes but a smile on his face. "Be happy, Lizzie," he whispered as he placed her hand in Ethan's. "You deserve it." The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with food and music and dancing in the town square. Even those who had whispered the most viciously about Elizabeth's condition seemed caught up in the festive atmosphere, offering congratulations and well wishes that seemed, for the most part, genuine. As the sun began to set, Ethan led his bride to the waiting wagon that would take them to their home now, together. "Ready, Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. The name, so new and yet so right, made her smile. "Ready, Mr. Ingram." They drove away to cheers and good-natured calls, Rice still clinging to their clothes and hair. Elizabeth leaned against Ethan's shoulder, watching the town recede behind them, feeling as if she were truly beginning a new life. The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Elizabeth learned to manage a household larger than the rooms above the store. Ethan expanded his herd of cattle and planted crops that flourished under his careful tending. Together, they weathered storms literal and figurative, a late blizzard that threatened the new calves, a drought that nearly ruined their first harvest, the adjustment to living together as husband and wife. Through it all, their love deepened, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Ethan never mentioned children, never looked at her with regret in his eyes when they passed families in town. Instead, he spoke of their future together, of the ranch they were building, of travels they might take when things were more established. Elizabeth's father visited often, clearly pleased with his daughter's happiness. The store was now managed by a young couple who had moved to Riverton from the east, though he still kept a hand in the business. On his visits, he would bring news from town and small luxuries that Elizabeth missed, books from the lending library, special teas, occasionally a length of fine fabric for a new dress. It was during one such visit, nearly a year after their wedding, that Elizabeth first noticed the change in her body. A persistent tiredness that she couldn't shake, a strange sensitivity to smells, and finally, the absence of her monthly courses, which had always been as regular as the phases of the moon. She said nothing to Ethan or her father, afraid to hope, afraid to voice the impossible thought taking shape in her mind. But after her father left and the symptoms persisted for another week, she knew she needed to know for certain. One morning, while Ethan was out checking fences on the far side of the property, Elizabeth hitched up the wagon and drove herself into town. She went not to the general store, where she would certainly be recognized and questioned, but directly to Dr. Hammond's office on the edge of town. The doctor, who had been treating the people of Riverton for as long as Elizabeth could remember, greeted her with surprise. "Mrs. Ingram, what brings you in today? Not feeling well?" "I'm not sure," she said, twisting her hands nervously in her lap as she sat across from his desk. "I've been different, tired, sensitive to smells, and I haven't had my monthly in almost 6 weeks." Dr. Hammond's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. And you're here because you think you might be expecting?" "I know it's impossible," she said quickly. "After the fever, you told me yourself that I would never." "I said it was highly unlikely," he corrected gently. "Medicine is not an exact science, Mrs. Ingram. The human body has a remarkable capacity to heal, sometimes in ways we don't expect or understand." He stood. "Let's examine you, shall we?" The examination was thorough, and throughout it Elizabeth held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid not to. When it was complete, Dr. Hammond helped her sit up and patted her hand with grandfatherly affection. "Well, Mrs. Ingram, it appears the impossible has happened. You are indeed with child, about 2 months along if my calculations are correct." The room seemed to spin around her. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without waiting for more definitive signs. Your body shows all the early indications. His eyes crinkled with genuine pleasure. It's a miracle, to be sure, but not unheard of. Sometimes the body heals itself in ways we cannot predict. Elizabeth pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, overwhelmed by a surge of emotions too complex to name. Joy, fear, disbelief, wonder. Your husband will be pleased? Dr. Hammond asked, a note of concern in his voice. Yes, she said, a smile breaking through her shock. Yes, he will be. She left the doctor's office in a daze, barely noticing the curious glances from those she passed on the street. Her mind was consumed with the miracle growing inside her, a child, her child, Ethan's child, a life they had created together against all odds. The drive back to the ranch seemed both interminable and too short as she rehearsed how to tell Ethan. Should she be direct? Make a special dinner and announce it then? Wait for the right moment to present itself? In the end, the decision was made for her. As she drove the wagon into the yard, Ethan came running from the barn, his face tight with worry. Elizabeth, he called, reaching for the reins as she pulled to a stop. Where have you been? I came back for lunch and found you gone. No note, nothing. The fear in his eyes made her heart contract with guilt. I'm sorry. I should have left word. I went into town to see Dr. Hammond. His expression shifted from relief to concern in an instant. Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me? I would have taken you. I'm not ill, she said, allowing him to help her down from the wagon. The word stuck in her throat, suddenly too enormous to voice. Ethan's hands tightened on her waist. Elizabeth, you're scaring me. What is it? She looked up into his beloved face, saw the worry there, and found her courage. I'm with child, Ethan. We're going to have a baby. For a moment he stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. Then understanding dawned, followed by an expression of such raw joy that it took her breath away. A baby? He whispered, his hands moving to cradle her face. Our baby? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Dr. Hammond says I'm about 2 months along. He called it a miracle. Ethan let out a whoop that startled the horses, then lifted her into his arms and spun her around, his laughter mingling with her own. When he set her down, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. A miracle, he agreed, placing a hand reverently on her stomach. But I already had my miracle when you agreed to be my wife. He kissed her then. A kiss full of promise and future and love, so strong it seemed to radiate from him like heat. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, Elizabeth's body changed, her stomach rounding, her breasts becoming fuller. Ethan watched the transformation with wonder, treating her as if she were made of precious glass. He took on more of the household duties, insisted she rest often, and spent hours talking to the growing child in her womb. He'll know my voice when he's born, he explained when she laughed at him for telling the baby about his day working with the horses. He? She asked, running her fingers through his hair as he rested his head on her lap. You're so sure it's a boy? Just a feeling, Ethan said with a smile. But girl or boy, it doesn't matter. Healthy is all I pray for. Word of Elizabeth's miraculous pregnancy spread through Riverton like wildfire. Her father was overjoyed, already planning what toys he would make for his grandchild. The women of the town, who had once whispered behind their hands about her barrenness, now offered advice and gifts and genuine smiles when she visited. It's as if they've all forgotten how they treated me before, she said to Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands busy with knitting a tiny blanket. People have short memories for their own unkindness, he replied, stoking the fire. But it doesn't matter now. All that matters is our family. The winter was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes left them isolated for days at a time. But inside their snug home, warmed by the fire and their love, Elizabeth had never felt more content. She and Ethan would read to each other in the evenings, plan for the spring planting, discuss names for their child. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my father," Elizabeth said one night as they lay in bed, Ethan's hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "Samuel. Samuel Ingram," Ethan tested the name. "A good, strong name. And if it's a girl? What was your mother's name?" "Catherine," he said softly, but everyone called her Kate. "Then Catherine it is, for a girl." She covered his hand with her own, feeling the baby shift beneath their joined fingers. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" Ethan propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "I think we'll love this child with everything we have. The rest we'll figure out together." As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, Elizabeth's time drew near. Dr. T. Hammond visited regularly now, pleased with her progress, but cautioning that the birth might be difficult given her history. "We'll need to be prepared for anything," he told them during one such visit. "But you're strong, Mrs. Ingram, and the baby seems healthy and well-positioned." Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll be ready." The labor began on a perfect May morning, with sunshine streaming through the windows and birds singing in the trees outside. Elizabeth was in the garden, planting the last of the spring vegetables, when the first pain gripped her. She gasped, dropping the trowel she held, instinctively pressing a hand to her enormous belly. Ethan, who had been repairing a fence nearby, was at her side in an instant. "Is it time?" She nodded, unable to speak as another contraction seized her. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms and carried her into the house, laying her gently on their bed, before racing to saddle his fastest horse. "I'll get the doctor," he promised, pausing only long enough to wipe the sweat from her brow with a cool cloth. "And your father. Hold on, my love." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear and determination. Dr. Hammond arrived, his face serious as he examined her. Her father paced the hallway outside, alternating between muttered prayers and reassurances to Ethan, who refused to leave Elizabeth's side despite the doctor's initial protests. "I'm staying with my wife," he had said firmly, taking Elizabeth's hand. "She needs me, and I need to be here." The labor was long and difficult, just as Dr. Hammond had feared. Elizabeth's strength began to flag as night fell, her face gray with exhaustion, her grip on Ethan's hand weakening. "She's losing too much blood," she heard the doctor murmur to her father, who had been allowed in to bring fresh water. "And the baby is in distress." "No," Elizabeth whispered, forcing her eyes open. "No. We will both live. My baby will live." Ethan's face appeared above her, his eyes fierce with love and fear. "That's right, Elizabeth. Fight. We're fighting together." She gathered the last of her strength, drew on reserves she didn't know she possessed, and when Dr. Hammond told her to push one final time, she did so with everything in her. And then, miraculously, a cry pierced the night strong, indignant, alive. "A boy," Dr. Hammond announced, his voice thick with emotion. "A healthy boy." Ethan's face crumpled with joy and relief as the doctor placed the squalling infant on Elizabeth's chest. "You did it," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "You did it, my brave, beautiful wife." Elizabeth looked down at her son, their son, his tiny face red with the effort of his first cries, his hands curled into fierce little fists. A miracle made flesh, proof that some wounds could heal, that life could triumph over the pronouncements of medicine and the whispers of doubt. "Samuel," she murmured, running a gentle finger over his downy head. "Samuel Ethan Ingram." The days and weeks that followed were a tapestry of joy and exhaustion, of midnight feedings and lullabies, of discovering who this new person was and who they were as parents. Samuel proved to be a strong baby with a hearty appetite and his father's blue eyes. He rarely cried except when hungry and seemed content to watch the world around him with solemn curiosity. Elizabeth recovered slowly from the difficult birth, but each day brought new strength. Ethan was a devoted father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was mending fences, as adept at soothing a fussy baby as breaking a wild horse. "You're a natural," Elizabeth told him one evening as she watched him walk the floor with Samuel, who had been restless all day. "I had good teachers," he replied. "My mother, before she passed. And you?" "Me? I'm learning as we go. Just like you." "Yes. But you lead with love." He looked down at their son, now finally sleeping against his shoulder. "That's all that matters in the end." Word of Samuel's birth spread through Riverton and beyond, bringing visitors and gifts and congratulations. Elizabeth's father practically moved in for the first month, unable to tear himself away from his grandson for more than a day at a time. "He looks just like you did as a baby," he told Elizabeth, cradling Samuel with practiced ease. "Same chin, same determined look." "With Ethan's eyes," she added, smiling at her husband across the room. "Strong blood." Her father nodded approvingly. "He'll be a fine man someday." As summer bloomed around them, life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch thrived under Ethan's care, with help from a young man from town who came several days a week. Elizabeth found joy in motherhood she had never dared to dream of, her days full of Samuel's needs and the work of the household, her nights peaceful with the knowledge that her family was safe and whole. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel asleep in a cradle Ethan had crafted, Elizabeth voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind. "I want to write to Dr. Wilson and Dr. Thorne," she said, naming the physicians who had pronounced her barren, "to tell them about Samuel." Ethan looked at her curiously. "Why?" "Because they should know they were wrong. Because maybe there are other women they've told the same thing, women who need hope." She reached for his hand. "Because our story might help someone else believe in miracles." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Then write to them. Tell our story." And so she did, penning careful letters that recounted her illness, the doctor's pronouncements, and the joy of Samuel's birth. She made no accusations, cast no blame, simply stated the facts as they had unfolded. Dr. Wilson never replied, but a month later a letter arrived from Dr. Thorne. It was brief but sincere, thanking her for the information and admitting that perhaps medicine still had much to learn about the human body's capacity for healing. He asked her permission to share her case with other physicians, to which she readily agreed. Life continued to unfold in its beautiful, ordinary way. Samuel grew from infant to toddler, taking his first steps across the kitchen floor with Ethan crouched at one end and Elizabeth at the other, both of them laughing and crying as he wobbled between them. His first word was "Papa," followed closely by "Mama," and then a rapidly expanding vocabulary that delighted and sometimes exhausted them. On the eve of Samuel's second birthday, as they lay in bed with the windows open to catch the summer breeze, Elizabeth turned to Ethan with a smile that held a secret. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "We're going to need another cradle." His eyes widened, then crinkled with joy. "Another baby? Are you sure?" She nodded, her own happiness bubbling up like a spring. "Dr. Hammond confirmed it yesterday. Due in winter just after Christmas." Ethan gathered her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "Two miracles," he whispered against her hair. "What did I do to deserve such blessings?" "You believed in me," she answered simply. "When everyone else saw what was broken, you saw what was whole." Their daughter, Catherine Elizabeth Ingram, was born on a snowy January night, with far less drama than her brother's arrival. She came into the world with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair, her eyes already showing hints of the amber flecks that matched her mother's. Samuel, now old enough to understand something momentous was happening, peered at his sister with solemn curiosity when Ethan brought him in to meet her. "Baby," he said, pointing at the tiny bundle in Elizabeth's arms. "That's right, son," Ethan said, lifting him onto the bed for a closer look. "This is your sister Catherine, Katie." Samuel reached out a tentative finger to touch her cheek. "My Katie," he declared, and it was settled. Life with two children was busier, more chaotic, and even more joyful than before. The ranch prospered, allowing them to hire more help, to expand their herds and their crops. Elizabeth's father, now fully retired from the store, split his time between his house in town and their ranch, delighting in watching his grandchildren grow. Years passed, seasons turned, and their family continued to grow. To everyone's amazement, though, perhaps not to Ethan and Elizabeth, who had learned to believe in the impossible, they welcomed two more children, James in 1879 and Rose in 1882. Their home, once so quiet, now rang with laughter and occasional tears, with running feet and bedtime stories, with the thousand small sounds of a family well-loved and thriving. On a warm evening in the summer of 1885, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a small gathering of family and friends, Elizabeth found a moment of quiet with Ethan. They stood at the edge of their property, watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played a game of tag with cousins and friends under the watchful eyes of grandparents. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, leaning against his side. "That day when you asked me to marry you?" Ethan's arm tightened around her waist. "I imagined being happy with you. The rest..." He gestured toward their children, their home, the life they had built together. "The rest is beyond anything I could have dreamed. They still talk about it in town, you know," she said with a smile. "The barren woman who bore 4 children, the miracle babies." "Let them talk," he said, echoing words he'd spoken so many years ago in the general store. "All that matters is this: us, our family." Elizabeth looked up at him, at the face she had come to know better than her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by sun and laughter, the silver now threading through his dark hair, the steadiness and strength that had never wavered. "I love you, Ethan Ingram," she said simply. "Through all the years, through all the miracles and ordinary days, I have loved you more with each passing moment." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "And I love you, Elizabeth Ingram. You are my heart, my home, my miracle." As the last light of day painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, they sealed their renewed promise with a kiss, surrounded by the life they had created together, a life that had begun with whispers of what could never be and blossomed into everything they had ever wanted. Behind them, their oldest son called out, his voice carrying clearly on the evening air. "Pa! Ma! Come see what Katie can do!" They turned together, hand in hand, and walked back toward their children, their home, their future still unfolding, still miraculous, still theirs to shape with love.